one of India's most erudite foreign policy scholars. Dr. C. Rajamohan is visiting professor at the Institute of South Asian Studies at the Nat'l Univ of Singapore. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajamohan, for speaking with us. The first question, before I get to whether Trump is good or Harris is bad or vice versa, the question that is top of everyone's mind is who is going to win this election? Who has the edge going into election day? Obviously, like I said at the top, there are down the line consequences for not just the US but around the world. But you have argued in a piece that you wrote for a newspaper this morning that irrespective of whether Trump wins or loses, he's already influenced policy in a way that even if the Democrats come to the White House, come to occupy the White House, they will have to follow the Trump template. Could you elaborate?
No, I've said, look, the question of globalization and trade, which the US has the number one economy, and its policies on trade and economic globalization affect everyone. And I think what Trump did in the first term was to challenge the assumptions about economic globalization and the idea that it is good for the world and that the idea is good for the American people, which is very strongly held opinion within the United States by the old establishment, the Wall Street, and the entire business community. He has challenged that notion in the first term, saying that globalization has not worked for American people, especially the American working class. So he sought to change some of those things, launching a trade war against China, threatening it against the Europeans, and to begin to impose tariff restrictions. And vis-a-vis India as well, we saw the Trump administration withdrew the GSP, or the Generalized Scheme of Preferences, a trade access arrangement that we had as a developing country. Now, the Biden administration has been less harsh in its tone, but has largely continued with the same policy that trade, as Americans have preached to the world, that globalization is good. And if Trump changed that prayer, that sermon into something negative, the Biden administration did not reverse it. So they too are today against free trade. They too are against uncritical economic globalization. So that's a big change that has taken place in the last 8 years. And now if Trump comes back, he's saying he's going to take even bigger measures, harsher measures, a 10% tariff on all imports from around the world, and 60% on Chinese imports. So that is what he's promising. And he's basically saying, look, either you do fair trade with us. If you don't give me access to your market, I'm going to impose massive tariffs. And linked to it, he's also talking about, really promoting American manufacturing, just as we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat. He's saying manufacturing should come back to the US, and he's going to use the tariffs as an instrument to reindustrialize America. So that is a fundamental shift in the economic policy of the number one power in the international system. So that is the biggest consequence of his re-election. Everything else fades into insignificance.
I do want to ask you, though, the most pressing thing that he will have to do, perhaps even on day one, assuming he wins, is how to end the two wars, the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel Hamas war. I do want you to address first the Ukraine situation, because Trump has said this on the campaign trail. Maybe it's bluster, maybe it's just campaign rhetoric, that if he's elected to office, then within 24 hours, he will stop the Russia-Ukraine war, i.e., he would force Zelensky into accepting whatever solution that Putin is offering, which as of right now means that Ukraine loses about 20 or 25% of the territory that it had before this war began. Can Trump do that? Why would the Ukrainians agree to it? Because at the end of the day, the way this war has been framed, not just in Ukraine, but across continental Europe, is that this is almost existential. If they let Putin get away with what he has done with Ukraine, then he won't stop at Ukraine. He would go into other countries. So how easy would it be to Trump on day one, as he claims he will do, to get Zelensky to accept whatever deal Putin puts on the table?
Look, I think there is a broader philosophical point that Trump had raised during his first term, saying that, look, America has no business fighting wars in distant lands. So he was very eager to withdraw from Afghanistan, and he tried, but eventually Biden did that withdrawal within a few months after his election. So even during this campaign, he's saying that, look, we should not be messing around every corner of the world. That's one point he makes. The second point he's making is because of the Biden administration's weakness, that Russia actually invaded Ukraine. If he were to be the president, Russia would have never dared to do what it did. Therefore, deterrence failed because of American weakness under Biden, and that he's going to. So that's second argument. The third argument he's making is that it's really that the need for a deal and bring this war to a close. So therefore, he's going to force the issue on both President Putin and Zelensky. In fact, he met Zelensky a few weeks ago, and he told him that I'll try and do a fair deal. And I will see that this war comes to an end. So that's what he's promising. And in fact, we should be very clear in our minds that if there's only one man who has the leverage over the Ukrainian war, that is the US. And Mr. Trump has no hesitation using that leverage. So he's basically one view is that he'll tell Zelensky, if you don't agree to my terms, I'm going to pull the plug on the military assistance. And he will tell Putin that if you don't take the deal I'm offering you, I'm going to double the aid to Ukraine. So that's the kind of, it gets you the drift of what he's trying to do. But I think there is genuine leverage for President Trump because this is not his war. He didn't start it. It didn't start under his watch. Therefore, he can take a fresh view, and there's strong support for that view within the Republican Party.
But what about on the other war? What about the Israel Hamas war? Because domestically also there's a lot of blowback on the Biden-Harris administration to the point that in some states it could even affect the Democratic vote because a lot of Arab Americans are upset with the kind of a long rope that they've given to Netanyahu. If Trump were to come to office, the fear is that that would be almost like a blank check, that he would actually encourage Netanyahu to even go ahead and pursue some kind of a regime change in Iran. Do you think Trump's response to the Israel-Hamas war will be A, very different from the Democrat response, and more importantly, will it be very different from his response to the Russia-Ukraine war, and why?
There he will be much more brazen in supporting Israel. He's telling Israelis that he'll give all that is necessary to finish the war. If you remember, you go back to the first term of Trump, they had a campaign called maximum pressure campaign against Iran. So there again, I think he says it's because of Biden's weakness of lifting some nuclear sanctions against Iran that Iran has got emboldened and it has done what it has done on October 7th and everything else that followed. So he will take a tougher line. I mean, I think their whole attitude is actually to compel a regime change in Iran, and they would have no hesitation in pursuing it.
I do want to ask you, though, about US-India relations. I know there's this famous saying that there is bipartisan consensus on the Hill. Whether the Republicans are in charge or the Democrats are in charge, US-India will always be a bipartisan affair. There is enough support for India in both the Republican caucuses and in the Democratic caucuses. But will it not matter who the next president is? Will a Harris presidency pursue its India relations very differently from a Trump presidency? Because we do remember the last time, he made a big deal about the Harley-Davidson tariffs and so on and so forth. And like you said earlier on in this discussion, if Trump is promising and threatening a 10% tariff on all imports into the United States, that would include imports from India. That would affect, certainly, an emerging economy like India quite disproportionately. So the question then is, who would be better placed for the India relationship to flourish? Would it be under a Harris presidency or a Trump presidency?
I think there are on the US-India relations, I would say there are three issues. One, which is the trade issue. In fact, that's the most important for us. During his first term, Trump always felt that India had too many trade barriers. In fact, whenever India comes to his mind, he always says tariff king. He says Modi is a great friend of mine, but he has too many tariffs. So I think that issue will come to the fore. So we'll have to deal with that issue. And it's going to be a general problem of trade. So I'm not sure how well prepared we are for it, but that's going to be the big issue. On immigration, which is the second major issue, there I think Trump's opposition is to illegal immigration, and that he's open to actually giving visas to Indian graduate students who are in the STEM disciplines. And that because he says, look, that America needs technology talent. Therefore, he's willing to retain those who come and willing to contribute to the American economy, and not the refugees that have come from across the border who have flooded American cities, and the Democrats have been eager to host them in so-called sanctuary cities. So I don't, and there is growing illegal immigration from India, and we saw the latest news. Americans have been returning some of these illegal immigrants, and India is saying basically, look, we want more legal migration into the US, and we're not in favor of illegal migration. Therefore, any agreement to repatriate them would be fine with us. That seems to be the arrangement under which people are returning. A third issue is on China, that Trump will be even harder on China, at least at this point, and that India is not going to complain about that, I presume. That the convergence between India and the US on the China question began under Trump, and I suspect that will continue. But I think Trump will be far more transactional rather than the gentle Biden that we've had to deal with. So the style might change, but I think the core convergence on Asian security, Asian balance of power, centered around the China question will remain.
And one final word, because we're talking about US-India, and one of the thorns in this relationship has been on the Khalistan issue of late, certainly between India and Canada, and with India and the United States as well, because of the whole Pannu issue. Do you think if Trump were to be president, he wouldn't care too much about that issue as opposed to, let's say, a Harris administration, because her administration, at least when it comes to the Khalistan issue, would be more of a continuation of the Biden administration's policy, but Trump wouldn't necessarily be big on beating the Khalistan drum, if you will?
Look, it's very matter of great concern for India, but it's not making headlines in the United States. The US has 1,000 issues to deal with. So I don't think, my view is that, look, these kind of issues will come and go. The governments are smart enough to manage these issues. So this is not a life-threatening issue. This is not something on which the India-US relationship will break. In 20 years, there have been many more deeper crises in the last 20 years between India and the US, including the Kashmir question, the nuclear test. So I don't think this Panun episode is some kind of such a fundamental earth-shaking issue that will really derail the deeper economic and geopolitical convergence that exists between India and the US today.
All right, Dr. Rajamohan, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18. Thank you.